I grew up in a small village in Nigeria, hundreds of miles away from the city and civilization. My father was a fisherman and my mother was a peasant farmer. My parents gave birth to 9 children and I was the 7th born. 2 of my older sisters had to get married at the very early ages of 13 and 15 in order to help train the rest of us. It was my eldest sister who was able to elicit some money from her husband to see me through primary and secondary school. The quality of our so-called secondary schools was nothing to write home about. Stories had it that St. Agnes boarding school for girls was built inside the evil forest. The evil forest was notorious for the unhappy and sinister souls that dwelled there, having committed one sacrilegious misconduct or the other against the morals and ethics of the community. Their bodies were normally thrown there upon death, or their living bodies banished to the evil forest to get tormented by spirits. I didn't want to believe the stories, but when I asked my mum about it, she told me that it was true, and she said it so aloofly, like it was normal for a village school to have their foundation on dead malevolent spirits. After my mum told me the story, I couldn't look at my school the same way again. During assemblies I'd stare so hard at the rusted leaking zinc roof, the soiled and filthy walls which had not been repainted, or the building refurbished since it was erected in the late 1940s. My rubber rice and bean slippers which I wore to school could not bear to walk on the ground. I stared hard at the red soil that sheathed the land. There was a heap of red sand at a corner shaped like a tomb where it seemed a body was buried. Sadly, when I saw it, I could not unsee it. I would stare at it every day until Sandra, my classmate, caught me staring at it during assembly. She was directly behind me and had been staring at me without me even noticing her presence. "I see you stare at it every day. Should I tell you what's in there?" she whispered from behind, which startled me and brought me back to reality. I shook my head and gestured to the principal standing at the made-up podium of the assembly for Sandra to pay attention to the principal. When we got back to class, but before the first lesson teacher could come in, Sandra came to my seat and sat on the wooden desk that housed 4 students per row. "Don't you want to know what's buried there?" she asked me again. "Not really," I lied. "Teacher would soon come into the class. Go back to your sit," I replied, turning to my seatmate to try and make a different conversation. Sandra probably didn't hear me, or maybe decided not to respect my decision, as she went ahead to tell me what was buried in there. "There are many more of them," she said as she took a breath. "If you go round the school compound, especially to our farm, you'd see more of them there." She took another breath. "You know, my mum also came to this school. So she's the one who told me this. So it's not made up, Amara." She breathed again, calling my name. Her breathing disturbed me a lot, and when I looked around, I noticed that nobody was listening to what she was saying but me. My heart was racing, and although part of me wanted her to stop, another part wanted so bad to get to the root of it. "Amara, what's buried there are the so-called missing students that this school produces every 17 years. At this point I yelled at her to please shut up, and gladly as I was saying that, the teacher walked into the class. Mr. Isaac was the Christian religious studies teacher. He was the longest working teacher in the school and had been teaching in it for 26 years. He was very tall and thin. Mostly wore singlet and brown shorts to class every day. Mr. Isaac was so emaciated that I could see his scapula protruding. This was the first time I was paying attention to the body build of Mr. Isaac, and this creeped me out, but I wanted to know more and finally settle my mind that I had nothing to worry about. So during break time, I used my 30 minutes break time to walk around the school premises, including the school field, to confirm what Sandra was rattling about. I walked out of the class and stared at the students formed in groups playing different local games like 10-10, Sue, and sighed to myself. Why can't I just be normal and let things rest, I thought. I soon drifted off and went to the other section of the school where nobody went to during recess or ever. They were filled with damaged buildings, cracked walls. All you could smell was urine and poop. I kept walking and only realized how extremely big my school compound was that day. I only stopped when I saw a weird smoke coming out from a very small inhabitable hut. I became extremely terrified and started trembling. My heart was racing deep, and as I was about to turn around and get back to class, a cold hand held me from behind and whispered, "I told you this school was creepy." I nearly screamed until I noticed that it was only Sandra. "What are you doing here, this girl?" I was galled. "I'm supposed to be asking you. I just saw you when you were wandering off and decided to come see too." As we were walking back to class in dead silence, Sandra broke the ice. "I'm going to run away, Amara. Ehan, I replied irritatingly. I'm going to run away from this village. The next 17th year for someone to be buried is in 2 years, Amara. I am not going to wait that long. This whole village scares me a lot. How do you intend to escape then? I asked. There's a school excursion coming up this weekend for the drama club and I'm going to join today so that I can go for the excursion. They're going to Lagos for a competition this weekend and I get there I'm going to use the toilet there and run away. I started laughing hard at the foolhardiness of Sandra. Are you stupid? I asked rhetorically. You don't know anybody in Lagos. Why do you want to cause pain to your poor mother? I asked extremely narked. By the time we got back to the class, lessons had already resumed and we had to take permission from Mrs. Teresa to enter the class. After class hours, I saw Sandra seriously telling the drama club supervisor, who was also our Christian religious studies teacher, Mr. Isaac, about her intention to join the drama club and her dreams of becoming an actress in future. I snuffled and went back home. I could not sleep that night. I kept tossing and turning on my mat, which I shared with my immediate older sister. She woke up once or twice to hit my leg for me to stop turning profusely. I couldn't help it. I thought about the hut with smoke I saw in school and wondered what such thing was doing in a school compound inhabited by kids. Few times sleep overwhelmed me. I'd hear a lizard on our roof and wake up with a racing heart. Sandra was right. This village was not normal. I turned again, facing my older sister. Above where she lay was the wooden chair where we randomly dumped our clothes after a hard day. I think maybe because my eyes stared too hard, but what I saw looked like the strap of my school uniform swinging in a slow back and forth motion as though breeze or wind was blowing it. But guess what? The night was dead and no atom of wind was actually coming in from outside. I decided to shut my eyes and count 1 to 200 in my mind, of course, to try and distract myself to sleep. Friday soon came, and as I watched Sandra and other students enter into the bus for the excursion competition, I felt I had made a big mistake by not joining them. I just loved my family too much and didn't want to give them a headache over somewhere I wasn't sure was better than I was. Sandra turned to look at me as she was entering the bus and winked. I waved at her and for the first time actually smiled at her. The weekend passed swiftly for me. I went with my father to fish and helped my mum cultivate some cocoyams on Sunday. The students were to be back on Sunday, and having this in mind, I went and stalled at Sandra's house. I hid by their tree during the evening, waiting to see if she kept good her plans. I waited and waited in vain as she didn't show up. So this girl was serious, I retorted to myself as I strolled back home as the darkness came drawing near. The next morning during assembly, I stared at the teachers' corner of the assembly ground and noticed that none of the 3 teachers who went for the excursion were back. I got extremely worried. What made it worse was that I had to pee and the assembly didn't seem to be ending soon. While other students walked into their various classrooms, I strode off to the toilet, but when I got there, I discovered it hadn't been opened yet. So I decided to use the staff's toilets located in the next building. Though it was out of bounds to students, I consoled myself that if I got caught, I'd explain that I had to pee somewhere. The staff's toilet was located, of course, in the staff rooms, and this was where the teachers were preparing for their various classes. I opened the doorway leading to a series of offices. The toilet was the last door on the left. As I thought about how close I was to the toilet, the pee in me started dancing rigorously in my bladder. Most of the offices were locked and I was glad because I wouldn't have to explain myself, but as I got closer to the toilet, I heard Mr. Junior's voice. So it has been done, nah. We've gotten another one for the sacrifice. As I heard that, I froze at the spot and couldn't go further. Coming back this evening, they had to make up a good make-believe story for the other students, nah. At this point my chest formed a very tight knot that my bladder just had to release itself. The pee didn't trickle but rushed down my legs to my slippers and to the floor. I could not breathe well. The minute I could move, I turned back and ran, not back to class, but back to my house. I ran so fast and didn't care that my whole body was wet, reeking of urine. As I approached home, my brothers were pounding yam, and at them sighting me, I threw myself to the ground and started screaming and kicking the sand. My brothers left what they were doing and ran to me. My mother made hot soup for me when she got back and heard that I came back distressed. Can you now tell your mother what happened? My mother beckoned to me. I shook my head and hugged her by her side. Can I get married and not go back to school? My mother patted me on the back. I know school is hard on you, but you know that going to this school will secure your future. I didn't reply her. I just sat and hugged her tightly. The next day I went back to school and decided to act like I didn't know or hear anything. During assembly, the principal announced that one of the school's students, Sandra, had ran off during the play in Lagos, but that they sadly couldn't find her. I gazed at the principal wide-eyed. The school was into some weird occultic shit and nobody had been able to bring them to justice. The principal reiterated how they had contacted the police both in Lagos and the police station that covered our community and other neighboring communities of the incident, and how they've promised to find Sandra. At that point I thought about Sandra's face, her thick eyebrows, and didn't know when tears started falling from my eyes. As I tried to wipe them off, I turned and noticed that there was something different about the heap of clay I had noticed last week. Few inches away from it was another heap which looked like someone had tried to conceal it from bulging. I thought about the possibility of Sandra being buried there and could only clench my fist. I walked into the class like someone who had just seen a ghost and sat down staring at the blackboard. Soon Mr. Isaac came in to teach Christian religious studies, and as I opened my bag to get my writing materials, a piece of paper fell into my laps. The piece of paper read, "I know. You heard what happened to Sandra. It will be in your best interest to shut up and keep it to yourself."